the Sustainability Management Master's Program, you're answering one simple question. Do you care about your future generation? If you care about your kids, their grandkids, then you care about sustainability. And a sustainability manager is someone who has the tools to make people understand how they can contribute towards developing a sustainable world. We have both part-time and full-time students. Our curriculum is 30 hours. Instead of thesis, we have a research project course and a seminar course which provides them with the kind of research background they will need to be successful in their job. But at the same time, sustainability is not always everything about environment. It also relates to the business. They will take a sustainable business strategies course. They will take a project management course. Most of these courses are going to be taught by industry people, the people who are doing sustainability on a daily basis as a part of their job. Any organization that has a large number of employees and has a physical infrastructure, they will have to have a sustainability office. If you have the passion to develop and maintain a sustainable world, come to us and we will help you shape your passion into a career which will create an impact.
Absolutely.
Okay, so I will get into the presentation now. Today's presentation is about energy and emission, but we're talking about charcoal in the context of beyond energy, beyond its source of, beyond it being a source of energy, but also a source of emission, and also as a resource that can help mitigate CO2 around the world. And we'll speak about the global charcoal supply chain. The main agenda for today is the global demand of charcoal. And then we'll talk about charcoal production and trade in local markets, but also on the international scale. We'll talk about the energy and industrial applications of charcoal and the question of charcoal as a renewable resource. You know, it comes from trees, so is it renewable? That's a very important question we'll be answering later. Producing charcoal with agricultural raw materials as an alternative to cutting fresh trees. We'll talk about emerging regulations such as carbon credits, which are aimed at reducing emissions, and the status and future of charcoal and its implications for CO2 mitigation. So the first thing to notice about charcoal is that it's not coal. I know when you spell the word charcoal, it has coal in its name. Most people would just interchange the names, but coal is a mineral which is got by mining. But then charcoal is, as you can see in this picture on one side of the screen, it's you can buy it in a bag and it's usually sold by weight. So you can buy it on the international market, online, in online shops, or to your closest grocery store. And on one side, it's usually used for outdoor cooking, such as grilling. And in some parts of the world, it's a necessity, but in some parts, it's used for leisure. So in the US, you can get charcoal for about $12, $8 to $12 for 3 kilograms of charcoal. And in Europe, you can get for just under $3 for the kilogram of charcoal. In the sub-Saharan market, it's even cheaper because it's more ubiquitous and basically more available. It's sold by volume and not by weight. They usually don't weigh, and the prices for charcoal are highly negotiable, just depending on the season and the seller and the buyer. So the trend of charcoal production looks like in this picture on the chart, picture on the screen. In 1993, we had about 30 million tons of charcoal. And in 2019, we can see it's almost doubled just in the span of 30 years. You can see that by 2019, we had close to 53 million tons of charcoal, which is, but by 2012, which is the most recent year, by 2021, which is the most recent data that's available with the FAO of the United Nations, it's come close to 54 million tons, which is clear that charcoal production is trending upwards. So this is the status of charcoal around the world. If you focus on part A of this diagram, you'll see that if you focus on Africa, you'll see that most of the charcoal is produced in Africa, most of the global charcoal. And secondly, you have the Americans, which includes South America, in Asia, and Europe is producing the least if you of the 4 continents, aside from Oceania. So if you move on to part B of the chart, you'll see this is the top 10 charcoal producers in the world. The highest producers are tropical producers. For example, Nigeria, you have Brazil, India, Democratic Republic of Congo, Tanzania, Ghana, Thailand. Most of these have a large forests and they're burning them down for charcoal production. But if you look very closely, you'll see that Egypt and Ethiopia are also among the top 10 producers. And they actually don't have a lot of vegetation cover. They're basically semi-arid countries, but still straining their ecosystems for the production of charcoal. So let's move on to part C in the corner and see who's exporting the most charcoal in the world. You'll see again, it's the tropical countries, Indonesia, Paraguay, Myanmar, Poland, Nigeria again, China. They are mostly producing for their local markets, but their forests are burdened with supplying charcoal around the world too. And lastly, in part D, I wanted to see if you can see can you see their names really well on the screen?
Yeah, it's small, but again, we can still see, yeah.
Okay, great. I wanted to highlight here that the top 10 importers of charcoal are actually Germany, Japan, you can see France, the UK, USA. They're really getting their charcoal mostly from the international market. So they're producing locally, but not the top 10 producers, although they are really, that is evidence of charcoal demand from the international market. Basically, all this is to conclude that if you look at the part A, Europe is producing very little, but most of the importers are also from Europe. You can see UK, France, there's Belgium and Germany. That means that low limited production does not actually mean that there's no demand. It means that this demand is being fulfilled from other parts of the world. And this is how charcoal is produced. It starts with a tree being cut, usually with rudimentary tools like a panger. And then the logs are piled in this manner, usually in an open forest. So no measurement of inputs, no formalities on discussing or counting how much logs are being piled or used per kiln. It's usually a very manual effort. So the size of the kiln, the size of the log just depends on the energy or just group of the charcoal burners. And then a pile of that is covered on these logs. So this is to limit the amount of oxygen supply before they send in the flame through the logs. And that process is called pyrolysis. In some countries, so this is a picture from Brazil, the cement kiln is built and these logs are fed into the cement kiln and still to limit the amount of oxygen, and then fire is sent through the kiln for the pyrolysis to occur. And when the charcoal is harvested, it looks like this. It's manual harvesting, and so it's carried usually by hand and put into some bags and loaded into trucks for transportation into the markets. So as you can see, charcoal is very lightweight. So a small truck like that can carry as much as possible, because it does burden the vehicle, but it can invite a lot of overloading. So charcoal transportation can happen by boat, and because it's lightweight, you can see 2 bags can even fit on 1 bicycle, and boats as well get overloaded. So this is a picture from Kismayo in Somalia, where charcoal is produced, and despite its limited supply of trees, that much charcoal is being loaded at the port to be transported to the international market. So in sub-Saharan Africa, charcoal trade looks somewhat like this. So it's on the street compared to what you saw earlier with the grocery bag that you can buy weighed in kilograms. It's usually on the street. This is not measured by weight, it's measured by volume. So you can buy like a basin, or you can buy, in the middle picture, you can see there's stockpiling, sometimes by shops, and you can buy one sack at a time for That's 45,000 shillings, which translates to only $12.46. So basically, the conclusion from here is that you can see how low the price of charcoal is in some markets, and also how ubiquitous it is. In the international market, you can see on one side you have the exporters of charcoal, and on the other side you have the importers of charcoal. And if you look very closely here, you'll see that the value of the charcoal trade is about $1.4 billion around the world. And this is the value of charcoal in 2020. So each year, the world is trading charcoal to the tune of $1.4 billion. And you can see some countries in here that you didn't see earlier. For example, you can see Ukraine in the chart. You can see Russia, you can see Croatia, Netherlands, you can see Norway, Greece, Spain. This all means that most countries around the world actually do have a charcoal footprint, either as importers or exporters or both in most cases. Charcoal is not just used for barbecuing, as we saw earlier, or as a source of energy in homes. In some countries, it's used as it's used in heavy industry. For example, in the reduction of iron to steel, charcoal is used as the reductant. It's used in sintering and palletizing. And this usually happens in the Amazon rainforest, where tremendous amounts of monocultures are built, are planted and harvested over a short period of time, like 5 years, 7 years, because that's the growing cycle, and mass plantations, mass harvesting, which damages the ecosystem and the native plant species. It's also used to reduce quartz to silicon as the source of carbon, because that's, so iron and steel is an alloy. From Namibia to South Africa, there's some exports of charcoal. From Brazil to the USA, there's charcoal exported for the production of solar panels. So traditionally, these industries used to use coal as a source of carbon, but because of recent developments in the environmental space, there's a carbon tax now on coal that's built there to limit pollution around the world. So they placed a price on carbon, for example, $30 to $35 per ton of CO2 emitted. That's making coal a less attractive source of carbon. And most big industries are turning to charcoal because charcoal is still carbon, and it's being classified as a renewable resource because it comes from trees. But because of the way monocultures are maintained, it's difficult to state charcoal as a renewable energy resource. And there's a lot of pollution that comes from it. In the EU, most producers are moving to hydrogen rather than charcoal. So the charcoal use is common in South America. So looking at the CO2 emissions that happen from charcoal production, this is a picture of one of those kilns that are burned. It's a smaller kiln because I think it was built by one individual, one person. So you can see very similar strategy. It's an earth mount kiln, and when the fire is sent through the kiln, this is the amount of pollution that comes through. So I want to draw your attention to the first CO2 emissions, this chart above. You can see that fossil fuels are the worst in terms of emission. But then there is other sources like nuclear that pollute a lot less in terms of CO2 compared to fossil fuels. And then hydroelectricity also pollutes less. And renewables are also considered less contributors to CO2 emissions. And you have pollutant emissions on one end as well, such as sulfur dioxide, you have the nitrogen dioxide, and also particulate matter. You can see on the right in the diagram below, you can see these are breathable particles that go up to the lungs during the combustion of charcoal. And because of the way charcoal is produced, particulate matter is not measured. Most of these emissions are not measured. And yet most of their industries are looking at charcoal as the renewable alternative. So if you look at the conclusion here is it's easier to measure the contribution of fossil fuels because it's usually produced in a controlled environment. But what happens when this source of energy produced in a very open space with very little monitoring is considered renewable? We don't know how much pollution is coming out of it. So maybe we shouldn't consider it as a renewable source. And there's some waste issues with charcoal. Not all these, because the pyrolysis cycle is so rudimentary, some logs remain unburned, which are run through another pyrolysis cycle. And on the other side, you see ash that comes through the transportation because charcoal is squished because it's overloaded. And so some of it breaks apart to form that ash. So those ashes are actually used to prevent earthing during the electrical wiring. So there is some advantage to the waste that comes from the charcoal trade. So charcoal can also be, the briquettes can also be from waste. We don't have to cut trees to produce charcoal. For example, we can use peanut shells, husks, cotton stalks, coconut shells. All of these can be used as alternatives to trees by putting them in a hopper, mixing them, and then pyrolyzing them to create the briquettes. This is one example of a briquette machine. And in some markets, you can actually manually produce them and dry them under the sun, especially in the tropical countries where the sun is plenty. And when the charcoal is burned, so after home use, there is another byproduct, which is the post-combustion ash after cooking. So that ash is actually very nutritious for plants. It can be used for fertilizer. It can be used as a fertilizer because it doesn't burn plants, doesn't contain nitrogen. And it can also be used for, it contains lime and potassium, which are useful for plant growth. So the main problem with charcoal today on the global market is that it's usually misunderstood as energy of the poor people. So if you look at most sub-Saharan markets, when charcoal use is brought up, it's misunderstood as, okay, people don't have electricity, so that's why they use charcoal. So that's a poor choice. But when it comes to the North America, Europe, it's usually a leisure product. So that's their difficulty in classifying charcoal as a source of energy. Secondly, it's made through an informal sector. There's not really a lot of data measuring how much trees are put in and how much output is got. If you looked at the sub-Saharan market, it's actually measured by weight. So, but it's sold by volume. So it's usually not measured, at least not in the technical sense, on how much how much charcoal we're producing per year. And that limits strategic improvement of the sector in terms of pollution reduction and also just pollution's measurement as compared to other fuels. Some of the public health impacts of charcoal production, like that inhaling the particulate matter, these are not known by users. Carbon monoxide poisoning is usually not advertised because of the way charcoal is packaged. And it's overshadowed by better modern alternatives. So you'll find that in most of the North America and Europe, charcoal is not even really in the discussion as a source of energy because they're talking about the bigger fuels like wind, solar. But then there's this other seasonal product that's used every summer for grilling that is not even considered as a source of energy. So the definition of energy security is that energy should fit, that it's ubiquitous, it's a low price, and it's basically affordable. And charcoal as an energy resource actually fits all these three definitions, but it's not considered. So this is the report, the most recent report for energy security risk from 2020. And this is a ranking of all the countries by energy security. So you'll see United States, Norway, Russia, China, Germany, France, you'll find Thailand. Most of these countries you saw were participants in the charcoal trade, as we saw with the massive international trade of charcoal. Most of them are participants in the trade, but actually I searched this report and the word charcoal does not even appear once in the report. That means that as the world is looking at energy security and defining it and ranking, they haven't started the conversation on what charcoal is as a source of energy and its role in the world in that respect. So what does that mean for the future of charcoal? So emerging economies will still demand charcoal and they will still heavily rely on it, because when you compare it with electricity, it's usually lower price to use and also it's cheaper than gas. So these are questions of home economics. People will still demand either both fuels and then use one in conjunction with the other as they prefer, because it does still play a part in the energy mix. So demand may also increase, especially in the steel industry, as the carbon tax affects coal prices. If you look at most environmental news, it's mostly about combating coal. What are we going to do about coal? It's usually reports of a carbon tax and just putting a price on how much carbon emissions are being done by sector. So coal, as the price of emitting goes up, industries are going to really look at resources that are considered renewable, such as charcoal, as a resource and a source for carbon. And we saw that indiscriminate tree cutting exists, because when I showed you how charcoal is produced by cutting trees, I didn't tell you what kind of tree it was. It's because most trees can actually create charcoal, and most producers in the charcoal sector actually travel to where the tree is, cut it down, and then produce the charcoal from there, and then move on to other areas with forests. It's a very interesting situation because there's no record of how much damage is being done to the ecosystem because it's difficult to track it over long periods of time. And trees are also growing scarce, which means there will be artificial price increases in charcoal, like most supply chains when it comes to scarcity. And most public health risks from charcoal use are actually not known to home users, which creates a significant issue because people could be dying because of the carbon monoxide poisoning, carbon dioxide poisoning as well that comes from charcoal use. Especially the logs are not really burned during it's mostly partial combustion. And that exposes a lot of people to particulate matter and premature deaths. But the good news is briquettes can be made from agricultural waste, and that varies by country or by region because waste is ubiquitous. It's everywhere, just like the charcoal, and it can be reutilized for the production of this material, even at a larger scale. And that's it in the presentation. So I would welcome any questions.
All right.